Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm James, continuing on with my Balsa USA Stingray 120 build. In this video, I'm going to be hinging the control surfaces. So I'm going to be using hinge points for this, and I decided that before I start installing everything on the actual airplane, I would give a quick demonstration on how to install a hinge point. So I'm going to be using these Robart hinge points, and Robart's been around for many years, decades, and unfortunately, like a lot of these companies that supply things to builders for of RC planes, they're going out of business. And you can still buy items from them, but obviously it's going to be for a limited time. That being said, these are pretty popular hinges, and I'm sure you'll be able to get these for quite some time from hobby distributors. So if you're interested in getting the Robart hinges, probably the best thing is to go out right now and buy yourself a couple bags of them so you have them on hand. Now there are other manufacturers that make hinge points. I'm just not really familiar with the other ones. So for the Robart brand, they have about 3 different sizes. They have a half A size, which is a really small one. They have a 1/8 inch size, 1/8 inch diameter, which is this guy right here, which I have a little jar of those. And then they have the bigger size, which is a 3/16. And obviously the different sizes are for different size airplanes. So 3/16 is the size that I would be using, or that I'm going to be used for this airplane. They do give you instructions. And the other thing that they have, which again, I don't know if anybody else makes such a thing, is they've actually designed this little jig, which I'm going to show you in a minute how to use. And this is, pretty useful for installing the hinge, but I'll go over that in just a minute. And again, like I said, if you're interested in these, go get them now so that you have them on hand for later. Okay, so let's take a look at the hinge itself. So it's a pretty simple little thing here. It's barbed, as you can see. So basically what you do is you drill these in. You're going to drill a hole into your control surface, and you just basically plug them in and you glue them in. And there's different types of glues you can use for them. I'm going to be using just a 30-minute epoxy. You can look online and see other people how they glue them. I think just a typical white glue is also useful. They don't recommend a CA glue. They say that a CA glue will make them brittle, so don't use a CA glue. But I'm going to go over sort of installing one here in just a second. I just wanted to show you what it looks like here. One thing I did notice, I saw a couple videos on them, and people, what they do for some reason is, I saw one person and he actually sanded off the barbs. And what he said in his video was that by sanding off the barbs, you make a larger surface for the glue to stick to. And I don't recommend that, because 2 things. These are actually, the size of these are basically the outside diameter, which includes the barb. So you'd have to drill your hole smaller if you did that. And then the other thing about it is that the barbs are going to hang on to the wood. And if you think about it, if you just looked at it really closely, if you remove the barbs, you're actually removing some of the surface area, because each of those little sort of triangles is actually increasing the surface area, right? If you think about it. So in any case, if you see that, I wouldn't recommend doing that. I'm just going to go ahead and install these sort of the recommended way. For my demonstration, I'm just going to be using a couple pieces of scrap wood here. This one in my right hand represents, your elevator, your rudder, or your ailerons. I've sanded it so it's rounded off here. And this one on the left obviously is going to represent, the wing, the fin, or the horizontal stabilizer. And then I'm just going to use an 1/8 inch hinge, and I'm going to get my little jig out here. And I'm going to do this with and without the jig, because I realized that you may not have a jig. And I'm sure you can kind of make something yourself up, but these are actually pretty cool. So again, if you're interested, get them while they're hot. Now before we drill out the holes, I want to mention a few things. One of them is that I'm going to use just petroleum jelly. I'm going to put a little bit of that on the hinge itself so that I don't get glue in the hinge. That'll be very helpful. And then the other thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using just this 30-minute epoxy. So to start with, when you're installing these hinges, you want to make sure everything's aligned properly. So one way to do that is to put your control surfaces together like this, and then mark it where you got to put your hinges. So you're just going to go, it's helpful to have a pen that works, but just do this to it. And obviously if you would do this across your wing or whatever you're doing, and that way you'll know they'll be lined up once you drill them. So for the 1/8 inch hinge point, I'm going to be using a 1/8 inch drill. That makes sense. And I need to be very careful. So I'm just going to go ahead and go with this guy first. And obviously you want it to be as straight as possible. You don't want to, you know, drill it crooked like this. That's not going to work. And you don't want to drill it through the wood. So you need to be very, very careful. That's why this little guy right here, this little jig, is very, very helpful. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to pretend I didn't have a jig. So I'm going to try it just by eyeballing it. Now what I like to do is I'm going to have to give myself a little bit of a starting point. Let me grab something. One of my favorite tools of all time is a little awl. So let's go ahead and just choose. Oh, of course you want it to be in the middle. Let's go here. And if you have that jig, which I'll demonstrate in just a minute, it lines up in the middle automatically. But we'll put this as our middle point right here. Okay. And then we'll do the same thing on this one. And now I'm going to kind of seat it a little bit with a little indent. That one. You could put a pilot hole in this. You could use a smaller drill bit, and that would be helpful also. And then just drill it out with the 1/8 inch. Okay. The problem with not using the jig is that because this is rounded, the drill bit will kind of want to walk, you know, away. So it'd be hard. You want to make sure you really are careful when you put it in here. Oops. Now one thing you can do, which would be helpful, would just to mark your drill bit. You can put a little piece of tape or something on there so you know how deep you're going. Hinge point's about that long. Just put that on there. Okay, so I got that. Now I'm going to do this side, which can be a little trickier because, again, it's very thin. Boy, if I can do this, I'll be special. Yeah, I thought so. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, because that just walked off of there, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out of here. Okay, there we go. The one that goes into the actual wing or the horizontal stabilizer or the rudder, you can just push that straight in like this. And you'll notice that the hinge itself is kind of sticking out a little bit, right? Now, what you need to do on the control surface, you want to open it up a little bit. So I'm just going to use a piece of sandpaper. You'll see why I'm doing this in just a second here. Because you want to kind of get that up to the hinge itself. Like that. Okay. If you didn't do that, it would be sitting, your control surface would be sitting out away from the hinge a little bit. You'd see a pretty good space between there. Hopefully you can kind of see that. Allows it to get nice and close like that. Okay, so I'm going to pull this out of here. Now, some people, if you look at the hinge closely, let's look at this one because it's easier to see. You can see that, of course, here's the 1/8. Here's the 3. This one's a 3/16 inch, but here's the regular. Here's the diameter of the pin hinge itself. But then as it gets closer to the actual hinge, you see that it kind of broadens out a little bit. Some people like to get another drill size and kind of drill out the very end of this. But you should be able to just press it straight in. The problem with pressing it straight in, though, is that you could sort of like bulge the wood a little bit, so you need to be careful. So it's up to you if you want to sort of just drill out the hole a little bit more, or if you're just dealing with balsa, you can probably just get a small piece of sandpaper like in a cone and just kind of sand it out a little bit, give yourself a little room. All right, so let me show you how this little jig works. This is going to go on here, and now I have to find my mark in there. So as you can see here, because the jig itself is going to get in the way, I'm going to have to drill a little bit further in than I would if I wasn't using the jig. So I'm just going to pull this guy off of here, and I'm just going to eyeball it, kind of where I need to go. But again, be careful. Hold it tight. Watch your fingers. There we go. I didn't line up I didn't go on my line. Oops, sorry about that, folks. Got too excited here. So let me go ahead and pretend that that was my line there that I already marked. We won't worry about that one. Watch this. Okay. Now I'll do this one. And I gotta look in here and see my mark. Again, I gotta be really careful because this is very thin wood. Okay, there we go. Put this in here. And there you have it. All right, so now I'm not going to glue this one in. I'm going to be doing that when I actually put them on the plane. You'll see me do that. But again, I'm just going to be using a little bit of petroleum jelly right on here. What I'll do is I'll take a little dab of this stuff and I'll heat it up with my heat gun, and it will just turn to liquid. And then I'm just going to paint it on, because I don't want to put too much on here. I'm just going to take it when it's a liquid. I'm just going to paint it on the hinge itself, and then it will sort of like kind of solidify again, if you will. And because I don't want to get too much on there, I don't want to just get a big blob on there or something. I want to kind of control how much I get on the hinge itself. So I'll put some right where I need it. And then the way to glue it in is I'm not going to lather up the entire thing with epoxy because it's going to be too messy. I'm going to try to feed some epoxy down into the holes. I'm just going to use something small like a toothpick or something and get some inside the hole itself. And then put a little bit on the outside here on the barbs. I don't want to put it up too high, because as you push it in, it's going to sort of squeeze and kind of push it out. So you don't want to overdo it with the epoxy. Once they're in there, then I'll wipe them down, and then we'll tape it in place, and then we'll let it set, and then all our control surfaces will be attached. All right, well, I hope that was helpful to you if you've never installed a pin hinge like this. And you know, if you go and look online, you'll find other people demonstrating different methods on how to do this. They're all basically the same way to do it. Everybody has maybe a little bit different technique that they use, but I try to keep it simple. Okay, so let me go ahead and clear off my work area here, and we'll start doing the hinges on the airplane. All right, so before I get started, I have a change in plans. I decided I'm going to use the 1/8 inch diameter pin hinge instead of this larger 3/16 inch diameter, which I mentioned earlier. It just seems like this one's a little bit too big for this plane. Okay, well, the hinge work is all finished. And you know, it's not a real difficult step, but you definitely have to take your time to get it right. And I think it came out okay. So the next step in the build is going to be to put the wire braces here in the tail section, and then also work on the landing gear. As always, I appreciate you watching my channel, and we will see you next time.